Chapter 7. An Unknown Species of Whale. This unexpected fall so stunned me that I have no clear recollection of my sensations at the time. I was at first drawn down to a depth of about 20 feet. I'm a good swimmer, though without pretending to rival Byron or Edgar Poe, who were masters of the art. And in that plunge I did not lose my presence of mind. 2 vigorous strokes brought me to the surface of the water. My first care was to look for the frigate. Had the crew seen me disappear? Had the Abraham Lincoln veered round with the captain put out a boat? Might I help to be saved? The darkness was intense, and I caught a glimpse of a black mass disappearing in the east. Its beacon lights dying out in the distance. It was the frigate. I was lost. "Help! Help!" I shouted, swimming towards Abraham Lincoln in desperation. My clothes encumbered me. They seemed glued to my body and paralyzed my movements. I was sinking. I was suffocating. "Help!" This was my last cry. My mouth filled with water, I struggled against being drawn down the abyss. Suddenly my clothes were seized by a strong hand, and I felt myself quickly drawn to the surface of the sea, and I heard these words pronounced in my ear. "If master would be so good as to lean on my shoulder, master would swim with much greater ease." I seized with one hand my faithful Council's arm. Is it you?" said I. "You?" "Myself," answered Council, "and waiting master's orders." "That shock threw you as well as me into the sea?" "No, but being in my master's service, I followed him." The worthy fellow thought that was but natural. "And the frigate?" I asked. "The frigate?" replied Council, turning on his back. "I think that master had better not count too much on her." "You think so?" "I say that at the time I threw myself into the sea, I heard the men at the wheel say, 'The screw and the rudder are broken.'" "Broken?" "Yes, broken by the monster's teeth. It is the only injury that Abraham Lincoln has sustained. But it's a bad lookout for her. She no longer answers for her helm." "Then we're lost." "Perhaps so," calmly answered Council. "However, we have still several hours before us, and no one can do a good deal, and one can do a good deal in some hours." Council's imperturbable coolness set me up again. I swam more vigorously, but cramped by my clothes, which struck me like a leaden weight. I felt great difficulty in bearing up. Council saw this. Let me make a slit," said he, and slipping an open knife under my clothes, he ripped them from top to bottom very rapidly. Then he cleverly slipped them off me while I swam for both of us. Then I did the same for Council, and we continued to swim near to each other. Nevertheless, our situation was no less terrible. Perhaps our disappearance had not been noticed, and if it had been, the frigate could not tack, being without its helm. Council argued on this superstition and laid his plans accordingly. This phlegmatic boy was perfectly self-possessed. He then decided that our only chance of safety was being picked up by the Abraham Lincoln's boats. We ought to manage so as to wait for them as long as possible. I resolved then to husband our strength, so that both should not be exhausted at the same time, and this is how we managed. While one of us lay on our back quite still, with arms crossed and legs stretched outward, the other would swim and push the other on in front. This towing business did not last more than 10 minutes each, and relieving each other thus, we could swim on for hours, perhaps till daybreak. Poor chance, but hope is so firmly rooted in the heart of man. Moreover, there were 2 of us. Indeed, I declare, though it may seem improbable, if I sought to destroy all hope, if I wished to despair, I could not. The collision of the frigate with the cetacean had occurred around 11 o'clock the evening before. I reckoned then we should have 8 hours to swim before sunrise, an operation quite practicable if we relieved each other. The sea very calm was in our favor. Sometimes I tried to pierce the intense darkness that was only dispelled by the phosphorescence caused by our movements. I watched the luminous waves that broke over my hand, whose mirror-like surface was spotted with silver rings. One might have said we were in a bath of quicksilver. Near 1 o'clock in the morning I was seized with dreadful fatigue. My limbs stiffened under the strain of violent cramp. Council was obliged to keep me up, and our preservation devolved on him alone. I heard the poor boy pant, his breathing became short and hurried, and I found that he could not keep up much longer. Leave me, I said to him. Leave my master? Never, replied he. I would drown first. Just then, the moon appeared through the fringes of a thick cloud that the wind was driving to the cast. The surface of the sea glittered with its rays. This kindly light reanimated us. My head got better again, and I looked at all the points of the horizon. I saw the frigate. She was 5 miles from us and looked like a dark mass, hardly discernible. But no boats. I would have cried out, but what good would it have been at such a distance? My swollen lips could utter no sounds, and Counsel could articulate some words, and I heard him repeat at intervals, "Help! Help!" Our movements were suspended for an instant. We listened. It might be only singing in the ear, but it seemed to me as if a cry answered the cry from Counsel. "Did you hear?" I murmured. "Yes, yes." And Counsel gave one more desperate call. This time there was no mistake. A human voice responded to ours. Was it the voice of another unfortunate creature abandoned in the middle of the ocean, some other victim of the shock sustained by the vessel? Or rather, was it a boat from the frigate that was hailing us in the darkness? Counsel made a last effort, and leaning on my shoulder, while I struck out in a despairing effort, he raised himself half out of the water and then fell back exhausted. "What did you see?" "I saw," murmured he. I saw, but do not talk. Reserve all your strength." "What have you seen?" Then I know not why the thought of the monster came into my head for the first time. But that voice. The time is past for Jonahs to take revenge in whales' bellies. However, Counsel was towing me again. He raised his head sometimes, looked before us, and uttered a cry of recognition, which was responded to by a voice that became nearer and nearer. I scarcely heard it. My strength was exhausted, my fingers stiffened, my hand afforded me support no longer. My mouth convulsively opened, filling with salt water. Cold crept over me, and I raised my head for the last time, and then I sank. At that moment a hard body struck me. I clung to it. Then I felt that I was being drawn up, and that I was brought to the surface of the water, that my chest collapsed, and I fainted. It is certain that I soon came to, thanks to the vigorous rubbings that I received. I half opened my eyes. "Counsel," I murmured. "Does Master call me?" asked Counsel. Just then, by the waning light of the moon, which was sinking down to the horizon, I saw a face, which was not Counsel's, and which I immediately recognized. "Ned?" I cried. "Same, sir." "Who is seeking his prize?" replied the Canadian. "Were you thrown into the sea by the shock of the frigate?" "Yes, Professor. But more fortunate than you, I was able to find a footing almost directly upon a floating island." "An island?" "Or more correctly speaking, on our gigantic narwhal." "Explain yourself, Ted." "Only I soon found out why my harpoon had not entered its skin and was blunted." "Why, Ned, why?" "Because, Professor, that beast is made of sheet iron." The Canadian's words produced a sudden revolution in my brain. I wiggled myself quickly to the top of the beam or object half out of the water, which served us for a refuge, and I kicked it. It was evidently a hard, impenetrable body, and not the soft substance that forms the bodies of the great marine mammalia. But this hard body might be a bony carapace, like that of the antediluvian animals, and I should be free to class this monster among amphibious reptiles such as a tortoise or an alligator. Well, no. The blackish back that supported me was smooth, polished, without scales. The blow produced a metallic sound, and incredible though it may be, it seemed, I might say, as if it was made of riveted plates. There's no doubt about it. This monster, this natural phenomenon that had puzzled the learned world and overthrown and misled the imagination of seamen of both hemispheres, was, it must be owned, a still more astonishing phenomenon, insomuch as it was a simply human construction. We had no time to lose, however. We were lying upon the back of a sort of submarine boat, which appeared, as far as I could judge, like a huge fish of steel. Ned Land's mind was made up at this point. Counsel and I could only agree with him. Just then a bubbling began at the back of this strange thing, which was evidently propelled by a screw, and it began to move. We had only just time to seize hold of the upper part, which rose about 7 feet out of the water, and happily its speed was not great. "As long as it sails horizontally," muttered Ned Land, "I don't mind. But if it takes a fancy to dive, I would not give 2 straws for my life." The Canadian might have said less. It became really necessary to communicate with the being, whatever they were, shut up inside the machine. I searched all over the outside for an aperture, a panel, a manhole, or use a technical expression, just the lines of the iron rivets, solidly driven into the joints of the plates, were clear and uniform. Besides, the moon disappeared then and left us in total darkness. At last this long night passed. My indistinct remembrance prevents my describing all the impressions it made. I can only recall one circumstance. During some lulls of the wind in the sea, I fancied I heard several times vague sounds, a sort of fugitive harmony produced by distant words of command. What was then the mystery of this submarine craft of which the whole world vainly sought an explanation? What kind of beings existed in this strange boat? What mechanical agent caused its prodigious speed? Daybreak appeared. The morning mists surrounded us, but they soon cleared off, and I was about to examine the hole, which formed on deck a kind of horizontal platform, when I felt it gradually sinking. "Oh, confound it!" cried Ned Land, kicking the resounding plate. "Open, you hospitable rascals!" Happily, the sinking movement ceased. Suddenly a noise like ironworks violently pushed aside came from the interior of the boat. One iron plate was moved. A man appeared, uttered an odd cry, and disappeared immediately. Some moments after, 8 strong men with masked faces appeared noiselessly and drew us down into their formidable machine.